Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a well-respected professional from Sydney, Australia, Dr. Mark von Rijmenam. Mark, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Ashutosh. It's a great pleasure to be on your show.
Thank you. Mark is the founder of Futurwise. He's a strategic futurist and an award-winning keynote speaker. He's an author of a book titled Now What? How to Ride the Tsunami of Change. So, Mark, before we talk to you about The Architect of Tomorrow and your book, a few questions for you. What first drew you towards futurism and emerging technologies, and how did that early interest shape your career path?
Well, that's a very great question to start with, and it's becoming a futurist is not something that you envision when you are a kid. But I started about 12 to 14 years ago in the big data space, and over time, while advising organizations all around the world, I started to notice that the focus away from just big data, but in the wider technological disruption that is going on is for me a lot more interesting, because the world is going through so much disruption at the moment, where different technologies are converging, and as a result, I'd like to dive deep into that area to help organizations not only prepare for tomorrow, but design and build better futures.
And you've described yourself as an optimistic dystopian in the past. What experiences or reflections led you to evolve into the architect of tomorrow?
I started indeed with an optimistic dystopian lens, because I am relentless about the opportunities when it comes to emerging technologies, but also very cautious and deliberate about the risks that are inherent to these technologies, to these very powerful tools. You have the good side of technologies, but you also have a bad and a very ugly side of technologies. So that lens is, I think, really important. But at the same time, we need to have a hopeful message for tomorrow, because the future is very long, and we need to prepare for that with a positive attitude. But that's why I decided to shift to the architect of tomorrow, where my role is to help everyone become architects of tomorrow, and everyone design and build a better future, so that we together we can move and push humanity forward.
Very interesting. And what role has curiosity played in your evolution as a thought leader, especially as technologies have shifted so rapidly?
Well, I think curiosity is the key to everything that we do when it comes to looking at and preparing for tomorrow. Because, as you correctly say, the world is changing so incredibly fast. If I'm on a long haul flight anywhere in the world, and I don't have internet, by the time I land, I'm out of date. So you really have to stay curious about what's going on, to scan the horizon for the signals that are coming to your way, and to prepare for that. Because if you don't do that, as we like to say in Australia, you snooze, you lose. So you have to stay curious. You have to explore the future and understand how it's going to affect your individual life, but also your business life, as well as your society that you're part of.
Well said. Let's now talk about the architect of tomorrow, which is one of the areas that you specialize in. What does it mean to you personally to be called an architect of tomorrow?
For me personally, it means that we are responsible for designing and building a better future. So we play an active role in that, and to push your responsibility away, to say, well, I can't, I'm just a small peg in the whole system, I can't have possibly an effect on that. I think that's a very narrow-minded perspective, and everyone plays a role, no matter how small or big. We are all architects of tomorrow. We are all responsible for designing and building a better future. And in a world where we have these powerful tools developed by powerful companies, we as individuals, as consumers, also and small organizations, we play a key role in making sure that we use those tools in a responsible way, and we require from the big companies to offer the tools in a responsible way, and that's where the architect of tomorrow comes from. Making sure that we are responsible for our own future.
And how does Futurewise, the company you founded, reflect your mission as an architect of tomorrow?
Well, I think it reflects in a large extent because, as a futurist, I deliver keynotes to Fortune 500 companies all around the world, but that's a very small group of people that I can reach. And my objective as architect of tomorrow is to make people aware of what is happening in this fast-changing world, and that's where FutureWise comes in. Because FutureWise, we allow you we help you to find your next insight faster, and we do that from curated sources. So we're in the world's best thinkers, thought leaders, academics, journalists, because the real insights, they don't appear in the mainstream media. Well, they do, but then by the time they appear in mainstream, you're too late. They happen on the edges of the internet. And that's where the world's best thinkers reside. And so we tap into that very valuable source, and we provide their insights in short form, as in summarized, but completely personalized to you. So you can drop in a YouTube video in English, and you get a summary in Hindi within a few seconds. So or you can get a French article, and you get a Spanish summary. So really tailored to you, so that everyone can become more aware on fast-changing topics. And therefore, once we are aware of what's happening, we can prepare better, and we can design and build a better future.
Amazing. And what are some of the biggest misconceptions leaders and organizations have about preparing for the future?
Well, I think that one thing is that I don't need to change. It's not up to me. And then what possible role can I play in this world? I think not changing. If you don't want to change your organization, if you don't want to empower your employees to change for you and with you, I think as an organization you won't be around for a long time. What I often say is that by 2030 there will be two types of companies: those that integrate AI and other emerging technologies, and those that no longer exist. So as a leader, you have to shift your mindset that these technologies are here to stay. If you want to not involve them, that's fine, but that you bear the consequences of that from a company perspective. So you have to integrate these technologies to prepare for the future.
Well said. You've also pioneered the use of a digital twin of yourself. How do you see such technologies redefining human engagement and leadership in the years ahead?
Well, I think the digital twin is what I did 2 years ago, where I was the first person in the world to craft a digital twin where you can talk to via text, audio, and video in 29 languages, which was a great experiment because I like to live at the cutting edge of tomorrow. But I do believe that in this world that changes so fast, static knowledge dies, and we need dynamic knowledge, and that's why I have my digital twin. I with my new book now, I have actually integrated it in the book, so you can WhatsApp my digital twin in your language if you want to dive deeper on a certain topic or a certain paragraph or a certain section within the book, so you can hear the stories behind my story delivered through my voice, through my digital twin. So I believe that the use of AI agents that represent real leaders or real thinkers is becoming a big thing, and that's why I've integrated it in my book as well.
You've also said that the future feels like a tsunami, and I'm going to come to your book in a few minutes. How can individuals avoid being overwhelmed and instead ride that wave with confidence?
Yes, look, I call it a tsunami because there's so much happening at the same time. We have technological change, but we also have ecological change. We have geopolitical change. It's just this perfect storm that is forming. And I don't think the world has ever seen so much disruption at the same time. And the way I think individuals, as well as organizations, as well as societies, can ride a tsunami successfully is by scanning the horizon, looking what's coming, seeing the faint signals that are out there, so that you get a sense of what is going on and what is going to happen in the next 3 to 5 to 10 or 15 years, and therefore you can then start to prepare for that. If you want to drive somewhere, you shouldn't drive blindfolded. You need to know where you're going. You need to scan the horizon, what's ahead of you. And that's where I think the first step to preparing and to successfully riding this tsunami is to look ahead and see what is coming that is relevant for your organization.
Fascinating. Where do you see the greatest opportunities for humanity to actively script a better future rather than simply reacting to change?
Well, I think it's in a large area where we have all these different technologies. It's not only AI. It's also robotics, quantum computing, synthetic biology, spatial intelligence, blockchain, brain-computer interfaces, 3D printing. So all these technologies that are affecting our organizations and our society. And I think from a societal perspective and a leadership perspective, I think the most important thing that we can do is to shift our mindset. That the old world is no longer there. The new world has not yet arrived yet. And we are in this transition period where we need to be flexible, adaptive. We need to persevere. We need to have a lot of resilience to understand what's going on. And that requires a gestalt shift. We need to see the world through a different lens, a different perspective. We need to understand that my reality is not the reality. Your reality is not the reality, but that there are a multitude of realities that we need to take into consideration. And that, a 3 can be an E, an M, or a W, depending on your perspective, depending on your reality. And I think that is a really important shift that we as leaders, as individuals, as organizations need to go through to see that there's more to it, that we live in this interconnected world, and we need to have a wider perspective on it.
Well said. Mark, let's now talk about your book, Now What? How to Read the Tsunami of Change. Tell me about your book and why did you choose to weave a science fiction story from 2051 into a business book? What does the narrative approach achieve that traditional analysis cannot?
Well, I think I really am a big fan of science fiction, and the reason why, because science fiction writers are generally really good at extrapolating the current technologies into a narrative far in the future, so that something that is really abstract actually becomes tangible, so that we can actually imagine what these new technologies or these developments will mean for us in the long term. So that's why I crafted this science fiction story, because the future is very abstract. All these technologies, they are very abstract. What does quantum computing mean? What does AI actually mean for me? And with this science fiction story that goes through the entire book, comes back after each chapter, I set out to help you, the reader, really grasp what is happening, grasp what is going on, and how the world is going to change.
Yeah. You also developed a wave framework, which is watch, adapt, verify, empower. How can readers apply the wave framework in their daily lives? And explain to me, what is the wave framework?
Yeah, sure. So when I set out to write the book, and I was contemplating, how can we ride this tsunami of change? I came to two approaches. One is a very long-term approach, which focuses on education, lifelong learning. As a society as a whole, we need to change our educational systems. But that's a long-term perspective. What can we do right now? That's where the wave methodology comes into play, where we watch for signals. So as I said earlier, we scan the horizon. We find the faint signals that will affect our individual lives, whether that's if you're a fresh graduate or a long-term multinational organization. What are the faint signals that will affect my reality, my environment, so that once you are understanding what's coming, you can start to prepare for that. So that's the first step. Then you understand what's going on. You have to adapt, because otherwise, if you don't do anything with this information, you still will lose in the competitive world that we live in. So you need to adapt, but you need to adapt with a long-term purpose in mind. And that means both from a career perspective, I need to work for the next 30 to 50 years. How should I interpret these signals? But also from a business perspective, what's my long-term vision? I shouldn't just only focus on the short-term quarterly shareholder meetings, but I should focus on the future generations, the next generation that are not even here yet, because everything that we do nowadays will have long-term unintended consequences that we need to consider. So we watch for signals, we adapt with long-term purpose, but then we need to verify everything that we do, because we live in a world where trust and truth are unfortunately disappearing. So we need to do something. We're in this deepfake era that I know that the person I'm talking to via text, audio, or video is indeed the person that I think he or she is. But at the same time, in a world where data governs everything that we do, we need to make sure that this data has not been tampered with by actors who have bad intentions. So that's where like blockchain technology can come into play to help us verify everything that we do. And then the final step, after we watching for signals, adapting with long-term purpose, and verifying everything we do, is we need to empower all our stakeholders to drive innovation. That means we need to work with our industry partners, we need to work with our customers, we need to work with our employees, we need to work with our personal environment to make sure that we collectively can design and build a better future.
Fascinating. Your book also combines Eastern philosophy, indigenous wisdom, Western innovation, and nature's wisdom. How did you weave these diverse perspectives into a practical framework?
Well, I started looking at the world that we live in today, and where we are heading to is going to be fundamentally different from the past.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that we can draw lessons from the past. And because the history might not repeat itself, but it certainly rhymes. So we need to draw lessons from the past. And that's where I drew in these different perspectives. So from a Western approach, I look at spiral dynamics, which is a fascinating theory to see where are you as a humanity, or as an organization, or as an individual on the spiral of human development, because that says a lot about how you see the world, what your reality is. Then I looked at Asian culture, Taoism, because this has been around for thousands of years, and the flow of life, to follow the flow of life, is a great way to flow with this disruption instead of being broken down by it. And then from an indigenous perspective, they have, the indigenous Aboriginal cultures, I look specifically at Aboriginal cultures, they have been stewards of nature, of Earth, for thousands and thousands of years. And I think we can learn a lot from that, of how can we have this long-term, multi-generation perspective of it. And finally, I look at nature, where there's a concept called umwelt, from a well-known writer, Edward Young, who says, every animal, every organism sees the world differently. A bat sees through echolocation, a bee sees through ultraviolet, etc. And our perspective is only very, very narrow from a light perspective that we see. So we need to have a wider perspective on the world. And I think the combination of these four perspectives help as humanity to push through this disruption that's going on. But we need to level up. We need to understand that everything is interconnected, and that we need to have a different perspective when we are designing our individual lives, our organizations, or our societies.
Great response. How do you suggest leaders deal with misinformation and disinformation in an age where falsehoods spread faster than truth?
Well, I think this is one of the biggest problems we have in the world. The amount of clickbait on the internet, the amount of synthetic noise on social media, it's a really big problem, because we can no longer trust or what we read or what we watch online. The number of times I come across a video and I think, oh, that's funny, or that's useful, and then I'm like, oh wait, this is actually true, or this is actually AI generated. And that's really problematic, because that rocks the foundation of our societies. That what I can see or what I can hear it has indeed happened. So that's exactly why I'm building Futurwise, to have this platform where you can trust. So from a leadership perspective, from an individual perspective, we have to be very careful that what we consume online, that we are critical to think, is this real? Can I trust this? And that's a problem, because these large language models, and that's plenty of research has shown that, are actually diminishing our capacity to be a critical thinker. So we have to become more and better at critical thinking, but at the same time we become worse at that, and that's a real problem. So we need to we need to think a bit more slowly about what we consume.
Fascinating. Two more questions for you. What role does ethics and value or values play in navigating the convergence of AI, robotics, and synthetic biology?
Well, I think ethics, is should be at the base of everything, and when I went to university a long time ago, I had my ethics classes, but I didn't really like them, and which is a shame from a hindsight perspective. In hindsight, I should have paid a lot more attention because ethics is so important.
Correct.
And it's if we dismiss ethics, then we end up in this society where winner takes all, zero-sum games. The powerful gets more powerful and takes everything. And that's not the world I would like to live in. That's a world where that's not helpful. And history has shown it many times when when the gap between the poor and the rich becomes too big, industry will collapse. Sorry, society will collapse, and there will be so much disruption to reset that. Because it's not healthy to have that. Unfortunately, we are moving to a world where this gap between the poor and the rich is only growing bigger and bigger and bigger, and we need to change that.
My last question for you. You write about the synergy of technology and humanity. What is one example where that synergy is already shaping the world positively?
That's a fascinating question. And I think it's in many domains, where we see, for example, in healthcare, where we have the synergy of technology, nature combined to create a better outcome. And I think the best example that I read yesterday or early this week that was in the news, where Chinese scientists have looked at oysters, how they connect to rock, to extract that methodology to heal broken bones in minutes. And that's, I think, a beautiful technology where nature has figured out something over the millions of years that we had not. And we look at nature, we take the perspective of nature, and we draw lessons from that, and we use that to have a positive outcome in society. And I think that is a fantastic example of that. If we were to do more of that, I think the world would be a better place.
Fascinating. And on that note, Mark, I just want to say what an amazing conversation this has been with you. You clearly have so much knowledge on so many different subjects, and your perspectives for the future truly live up to your name of an architect of tomorrow. Thank you for speaking to me about your journey. Thank you for speaking to me about your book and for every bit of information and knowledge you've given to us today. Thank you again, and good luck.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for The Brand Called You.